Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Caitlin Bell, and I'm the Gene Jones Director of Public Programs here at the Nevada Museum of Art. Thank you for joining us for today's talk surrounding paleontology, sci-fi, and fantasy. Today's talk is both a supporting program for the exhibition Deep Time, Sea Dragons of Nevada, and tomorrow's Nevada STEAM Conference. Our speaker this afternoon will give another different keynote at tomorrow's conference. Thank you to those of you who are joining us that will also be at the conference tomorrow. If you could please take a moment to silence your cell phones now. We will pass around microphones at the end of Kiersten's presentation. We ask that you speak loudly and clearly into the microphone, both for our recording as well as so that Kiersten can hear you clearly. I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Kiersten Formoso is a presidential postdoctoral fellow at Rutgers University. Originally from New Jersey, she received her PhD in geological sciences from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, studying how terrestrial ancestry influences evolution into aquatic environments. Formoso is keen on the intersection of biomechanics and major evolutionary transformations. Outside of her research and teaching, she is an avid musician, playing trombone in chamber ensembles at Rutgers, enjoys video games, and really loves James Cameron movies, especially Titanic and Avatar. Welcome, Kiersten.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I totally forgot that information in the bio is what I had sent, so it's only a little bit embarrassing, but it'll make a lot of sense in context with this talk. But so yes, hello everyone, I'm Kiersten. I want to give a sincere thanks to all of you for coming, for attending, and even sincere thanks to the Nevada Museum of Art for this invite. This was organized months ago, and I can't believe finally April is here, and I'm here in Reno for the first time ever, about to give this talk, which is the first talk of this nature that I've ever given in my career. So I'm really, really excited to do this. So without further ado, I will get started. So, as you could tell by my introduction from Caitlin, I love sci-fi, I love fantasy. It's definitely kind of my life force, and a lot of us hopefully are familiar with sci-fi and fantasy across different media, from books, television shows, and movies. Some of the most iconic ones are featured up here. We have hopefully what will look familiar to at least a few people in the audience, probably one thing for at least each person here. We have Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Alien franchise, Avatar. This is from the video game Elden Ring, obviously Star Wars, Dune. This is from Dune 2, and then some more Avatar because I do really love it a lot. And so it actually pained me to have to pick things to put up here in this collage. I could probably have 5 slides that are collages of sci-fi and fantasy on their own, but this is kind of setting the stage of all these awesome stories and storytelling forms of media that I love, but I love them for reasons that stem from my career as well. And so, as Caitlin pointed out, I am a paleontologist. I'm definitely living that little kid dream. My mom alleges, and I believe I have no reason not to, that the first job I ever said I wanted was, I want to be a paleontologist. I allegedly said that when I was around 5 years old, and I actually achieved it. I got my PhD at USC in fall 2023. So I'm a little bit out of it now, but I still feel fresh, and it's very hard for me to realize and believe sometimes, like, oh my gosh, I'm a paleontologist. I really pulled this off. I can't believe it. And so as a paleontologist, though, my personality, my nature, and my job, I see the past in everything, truly everything, in life, in geology, the rocks around me. And of course, I'm going to see that past in some of my favorite sci-fi and fantasy stories, which you're going to kind of get really fun insights into in this talk. And it's no coincidence, though, that I see I see paleontology in sci-fi and fantasy, because paleontology and geology shape the world building in these franchises, in this media, in these TV shows. So this is a shot from Dune. This is the planet Arrakis. We'll get to that a little bit later. But so When you are world building, it's really, really critical that you are inspired by grounded elements because world building matters. It matters for your immersion. Imagine if something you were watching didn't really have any logic or consistency to it. And there is media that might be that way, but it's telling a different kind of story. But you want a world that is actually grounded in something. You want to be immersed in it. You want everything that's happening in what you're watching to be believable, to be rooted in something familiar. So you want immersion in your world building. You want a degree of realism in your world building. It can't be totally ridiculous that it's unfamiliar to the human eye or something that's so kind of foreign and off that doesn't really scream realistic at all that it pulls you out of it. I mean, I will watch sci-fi movies with people who are like really, really picky and they're like, well, that's not realistic. I'm like, well, obviously not. But if you can make a really good draw from science, then that realism approach is even it's more accessible for people. So realism matters when it comes to world building. And then, of course, these three things kind of tie together, but believability too. So obviously a lot of disbelief is suspended when we watch movies, like a giant dragon the size of a building flying. That couldn't happen in real life. But the way it's placed in its context, it's believable. It's believable in its story, given its inspiration. So world building is important for these three elements, and I use Avatar's kind of Pandora backdrop in the background, like floating mountains in Avatar. It's not necessarily realistic, but in the context of the movie, it's a believable thing. That is a part of the moon Pandora. And so we buy it, we believe it, we get immersed in the movie, and we enjoy it more when a world is built well. And a world can be built extra well if science goes into it, in my opinion. And so the cool thing about the past, so with the fields of paleontology and geology, is that we have so much source of inspiration. This is a nice spiral showing all geologic time. And if you see all this time here, there's a lot of nothing on Earth here. And then here's the Cambrian explosion. This is where animals actually started to really evolve and become familiar. And of course, this end sliver here is our existence. And the dinosaurs went extinct right here. So there's a lot of time on Earth to draw inspiration from in both geological scales as well as life scales. 99% of all life that has ever existed on planet Earth is extinct. We are living in the present. We're living in like one tiny sliver of time. And so when you take all the life that's living right here, right now, compared to all of the life here and a little bit of life up in here, it's all gone, except for what's around today. And so think about that, 99% of all life, we have so much inspiration, so there's this power of the past that we can take forward. But so before I talk about how paleontology and geology inspire more modern stories, I do want to talk about how humans were storytelling before paleontology and geology. So you would have in medieval times kind of these bestiaries. And so some of the most iconic bestiaries are these in these compendiums of kind of these hybrid animals where people would take eagles and birds and lions and horses and kind of smash them together. So that was kind of those humans' ways of interacting with the natural world. They didn't have paleontology, they didn't have fossils, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they did have animals, they knew what they saw, and this was kind of their attempt at mythology and folklore, and that's where you get a lot of these creatures, things like griffins and hippogriffs that are like smashed hybrids of animals. That was to them kind of fantastical, again, rooted in the animals that they could observe and what they could see. And so I mentioned kind of this dinosaurs influence mythological creatures. This is something that's quite common in the general cultural zeitgeist. Obviously, people would have found giant dinosaur bone fossils, and surely that would have inspired dragons, right? That this Protoceratops inspires something like this griffin because its fossils are found in the Far East, where griffins are found in the Far East, and it has a beak like a griffin does. These must be obviously related, they must be inspired. And so this was something that was originally put forth in, I believe, starting from the 70s by the author Adrian Mayer, who's a faculty member at Princeton, basically relating early fossils to the inspiration of myths and creatures in human history. There's this famous thing of like, oh, well, obviously the Greeks and earlier found these miniature elephant fossil skulls on these islands, and they would have interpreted it as a cyclops. Kind of looks like a human skull. It's got the big mandible, the big jawbone. Sure, it's got these tusks that they never show on the cyclops, but we don't have to talk about that part. This big nose part, obviously that's what they thought was the cyclops eye. So this is really common. Who here in the audience, raise your hand if you've heard dinosaur bones influence myths and folklore? Couple hands, right? So that, again, it's a common thing. This really established a lot, and this was very much run through. But here's the thing. We all like to think that fossils are sticking like this out of the ground, these beautiful, articulated things, just a T-Rex just lying there ready to go. That is very much not the case at all. It maybe will look like this underneath, but this is what it'll look like after you excavate tons of rock, like hard rock and matrix around it. This famous scene from Jurassic Park, the beginning, showing this beautiful velociraptor that they're like digging around with toothbrushes and brushes and chisels, and it's like perfectly there. Like I wish as a paleontologist. But on the next slide, I have a video of a fossil I found in the field. Me and my colleague were in New Mexico. So I'll play now. So this is a tyrannosaur rib in the dirt, not the dirt, in the rock. Look at how you have to chisel those pieces out. And he saw this. He was up on like a bluff. I'm down in the canyon looking for things. Like, oh, I found something. Of course, he's so good at finding fossils. Like, oh yeah, it's a theropod rib. I'm like, lucky. But so then we have to start, excavating it, and because we want to take it out to jacket it and to prep it. This is what fossils look like on the surface. You see one bone exposed, and as a paleontologist, you hope. You're like, oh my gosh, please let it lead to something bigger. This did not lead to anything. It was just one rib. It was the most waste of my life, like in the field ever. And so that's what this looks like. So it is very unlikely that people were finding these fossils that were looking enough to inspire dragons and other creatures. And so this is actually kind of a big movement, if you will, amongst us vertebrate paleontologists, that this is kind of a myth that dinosaur bones influence mythological creatures. It doesn't mean that ancient peoples didn't find dinosaur bones and were like, that's kind of weird, what is this? Certainly, it would be impossible to say no human ever found a dinosaur bone. It's like, that's weird, what is this? But as far as explaining mythology broadly, it's unlikely. If anything, if they found these bones, rather it validated a myth of a creature that they already had, and they ascribed that bone to said creature. Now, so that is kind of paleontology, beforehand, or rather, what paleontology didn't do because it didn't exist as a field yet. But at the same time, humans, we kept going, and people were finding fossils. We did get to a point where more and more fossils are being found. So this is an ichthyosaur. I know Nevada loves ichthyosaurs. I love ichthyosaurs. And this is Mary Anning, who is very famous for finding a bunch of ichthyosaurs in the United Kingdom. And so people were finding these bones in the 18th, 19th century and are like, what are these? This is clearly an animal. These are clearly bones. We know these were real, but we don't see them anymore. They look like this. Well, they haven't seen that. They're like, I've never seen that. Have you? No, I have not seen that. And so they have these bones of animals that were real, obviously, but they weren't seeing them around. And so kind of a thing that they thought at the time is like, well, life on the earth stayed the same. It's always been the same, right? And so we, of course, now in this audience know the answer is no. But that actually was not known until pretty recently in human timescales. So this is one of my favorite fossils. This is a fossil of Mosasaurus hoffmanni that was found in Maastricht in 1764. And Mosasaurus is a big lizard. It's a big marine lizard, for those familiar with the Jurassic World franchise, rather the big swimming giant jaws thing, that's a mosasaur. And it was described in 1808 by a man named Georges Cuvier as a lizard. He's like, okay, this is definitely a lizard. It has the anatomical features of a lizard, and it's good that they found the skull, which is where most of lizards' anatomy actually even is. But I've never seen a giant swimming lizard like this. What is going on? Why are we starting to find all of these creatures that don't exist anymore, seemingly? Where did they go? Thomas Jefferson famously was obsessed with fossils. This is one of my favorite fun facts. Half the reason for the Lewis and Clark expeditions was because Thomas Jefferson believed that there were mastodons in the West. This is his mastodon, Thomas Jefferson's mastodon. He was many things, lawyer, naturalist, and he was obsessed with mastodons and other fossils. He's like, what are these? One of the most famous sites for mastodon fossils is Big Bone Lick in Tennessee, and you get tons of these, and he was so enamored with this. And so Lewis and Clark were genuinely partially commissioned as part of their goals to go find real mastodons alive. So this is a real statement from him. The bones exist, therefore the animal has existed. If this animal then has once existed, it is probable that he still exists. This is what he wrote. He was convinced that they were out there somewhere. And that's because they didn't know about extinction. And so the next phase of human understanding about paleontology and geology is the concept of extinction and an old Earth. And so how did we get to that? So these three people, and plus one more, and we'll get to him in a little bit, can be credited with really the birth of modern paleontology and geology. So Georges Cuvier is the gentleman I mentioned who described Mosasaurus as a lizard, like this is a lizard, but where is it? So he came up with a concept called catastrophism. And this is a real cross-section he drew, which is pretty much the earliest sedge-strat section ever, where he kind of took this chunk of exposed rock somewhere in France and cataloged it, like there's life here, there's no life here, the sediment changes here, no life here, that's weird. Things are clearly dying in time. That's so strange. So he ascribed it to these big catastrophes that have come and gone throughout Earth's history and killed life, and new life came to take its place. Then, at the same time, you had James Hutton, who is dubbed the father of modern geology, coming up with concepts of uniformitarianism, that actually Earth has had the same processes on the planet for its entire existence, and that is what gets mountains and mountain building and volcanoes and plains, et cetera. That basically wind, rain, and other geologic forces are consistent, and that is what has shaped the Earth that we have today. So they were doing that, and he was doing this and actually at odds with Georges Cuvier. He didn't believe in catastrophism, but we now know here that actually the three of their concepts work very well together in what actually did happen. And then Charles Lyell came along and wrote this really fantastic book called Principles of Geology. It was published in 1833, and it's pretty much the origin of species, but for geology. This was kind of the first of its nature, like really explaining the Earth around it. People loved it. And then, of course, leading to the fourth surprise person on the list is going to be Charles Darwin, who published On the Origin of Species in 1859. And he was really able to tie all of this together. He was able to tie the concept of catastrophism from Cuvier along with these uniformitarianism principles of Hutton and Lyell. So like, okay, animals are evolving, and they need a lot of time to evolve. And that means the Earth has to be really old, which is what Hutton and Lyell are saying. This is great. Evolution is real. This can work. We just need transitional forms. Oh, look at all these fossils that people like Cuvier and others are finding. This is great. So the four of these people together with obviously other players, people like Lamarck, among others, are really key to the birth of modern paleontology and geology by the mid-19th century. And so really what this did was it validated old myths and new stories. So maybe it didn't necessarily support like mythological creatures and dragons, but now at least we know that, wow, so those are our myths, but it looks like the things we had in the fossil record are even weirder than what our myths were. So it kind of validates the human creativity, human mind, and it could start to ground new stories. So now people are aware of paleontology, geology, evolution, and history of life in the mid-18th century, so you can start to get really cool things. And so this is going to be Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, which I don't think I realized was published in 1864. That's, and they didn't know. They thought the Earth had a center. At this point, geology and evolution was just kind of coming up, so there were references, so it's kind of scientific in nature. But it didn't get something right, which is that Earth has a center. They didn't really know that yet. Uniformitarianism was a thing, but plate tectonics wasn't. So then this gentleman came along many years later. This is Alfred Wegener. He theorized continental drift in 1912 based on the location of fossils. Like, the same fossils can be found in Africa that can be found in South America. That's super weird. Why is that? I don't get it. I bet you the continents drifted apart. And so 1912 was where he put that theory. Does anyone know when plate tectonics was actually accepted? Anyone give me like a year? So 1912, give me like a decade. It's like 19-somethings. 1970s. Okay, any other guesses? 95. Okay, it was 1960s. The 1960s, so 50 years went by before he was validated. Alfred Wegener has like one of the saddest scientific stories ever. He died at laughingstock in his field, and he was totally right. He was vindicated years later, given a bunch of awards posthumously. I'm like, that doesn't matter, So, but yeah, I get so sad when I think of Alfred Wegener because he was totally on the money. So plate tectonics wasn't even accepted to the 1960s. So people don't even know the continents could move around and stuff. So that's why you get things like Journey to the Center of the Earth or early sci-fi stories that don't really take into account different shaped continents until stories post-1960s, which is really cool. And so This is a fun one, and I'm not going to read this whole quote. If you want, please do, but this is a real quote in the movie, and it always stuck out to me. Godzilla came out in 1954, and it really also shows kind of the understanding of science in the 50s. So they're right about a few things. So they got the million years ago correct, but certainly way more than 2 million years ago. Dinosaurs were living past 66. Brontosaurus, which is a valid taxon again. And they said scientists call this the Jurassic period. They referenced the Cretaceous period. A rare intermediate organism was evolving from a marine reptile to a terrestrial animal. So they have evolution here. They mention a trilobite found in Godzilla's footprints as a way of grounding Godzilla in time based on that trilobite. And so I love this movie because it really is such a fascinating glimpse into what we knew about science and paleontology and evolution at the time. But this is a great example of where paleo and geology are starting to now influence these stories. Godzilla's whole plotline, which is kind of lost in more recent movies, Godzilla is like a dinosaur. That's pretty obvious when you look at him, but people forget Godzilla is a giant marine evolving dinosaur from this kind of ancient world. So right there, great inspiration for paleontology, iconic character that is still alive and well today in movies. And so here's our friend. And then, of course, we kind of got an attempt at making it more like a dinosaur in 1998's Godzilla, which is actually the one I like, which I know is the most hated one in the entire franchise. But I love Godzilla 1998 because they tried to update the science. Like, okay, Godzilla's supposed to be a dinosaur. Of course, in this movie, he's like a mutant iguana or something. But they gave him a horizontal body posture, big legs, kind of bird-like scales. They did their best. And so with that, a lot of people think of paleontology in that context, which is the creature design and inspiration. So that is kind of where I'll lead to next. So now paleontology and modern geology exists. Now we can start cooking with how they inspire based on science. So first thing I'll touch on are dragons from Game of Thrones. Who here watches Game of Thrones? Watch Game of Thrones? House of the Dragon? Yeah, so good, right? So I love the design of the dragons in Game of Thrones. And so these are two extant animals. This is a Komodo dragon. So the only animal has the word dragon in it. Well, there's other, but this is the one. And then a crocodilian, like an alligator or Nile crocodile. So kind of comparing to like, okay, yeah, maybe without fossils, someone could come up with a really cool dragon design based on living animals. I mean, these are plenty intimidating, absolutely. But so what's cool is that the Game of Thrones dragons have what's called an antorbital fenestra. And I'll break down this word. Ant just means in front, anterior to, orbital means eye, fenestra means opening or window. Does anyone here speak Italian? No, okay, well that's how you say window in Italian, so opening. And so that's what this is, antorbital fenestra. A lot of reptiles do not have that today. So the crocodilian does not have that. Komodo dragon doesn't have that. And if we move away from reptiles and just go carnivore skull, wolves or canines don't have it either. So why did they put a hole in the middle of this dragon's skull? I mean, that's so weird. Because dinosaurs have holes in front of their skulls, and the Game of Thrones writers said that they used tyrannosaurs and other theropod dinosaurs as inspiration for the design of, I guess this is Balerian skull, a big giant black dragon. And so the antorbital fenestra is a defining feature of dinosaurs and their relatives. So that's a really cool detail that like people might not appreciate on the surface, but it's a really cool anatomical thing they didn't have to do, but because they took direct inspiration from actual dinosaur skulls. So moving on to this grotesque creature from the video game Elden Ring. And so this one really stuck out to me because it's essentially a bird or vulture with teeth. It's like, well, birds don't have teeth. That's the whole point. That's what makes them birds. They have beaks and not teeth. Okay, but there was a bird called Hesperornis, which was an almost bird. And I say almost bird because if you're thinking about evolution, if you have birds in one group, Hesperornis is like right on the outside. So if you saw it, you would call it a bird. This is what it looked like. But it had freaky teeth like that. That just reminds me so much of this creature. And I don't know if the Elden Ring designers actually took into account Hesperornis actually lived more like a cormorant type lifestyle, cormorant or a loon diving in the water. But it's cool because there is precedent for this design. So at the least, even if the creators didn't get directly inspired by it, you as the audience member could be like, yeah, okay, a bird with freaky teeth, that is actually believable based on the fossil records. So super cool. More Elden Ring stuff. This is a giant, terrifying bear in game. This game is so hard and so scary, by the way. I don't know who here plays video games, but Elden Ring terrifies me. Great game, though. But this bear, which is so freaky, could easily be likened back to the giant short-faced bear, which is a real bear that existed not too long ago. It only went extinct 12,800 years ago. Early humans lived alongside this bear. Absolutely. And this doesn't maybe look that tall, but I always like to express that while polar bears are like the biggest bears on Earth, a polar bear height, if it's standing in front of you, is going to be like there. And look how much taller this bear is than a polar bear. And this is what it looks like standing. I think my soul would just leave my body. I wouldn't even let it kill me. I would just die if I saw it. Like, that's it. It's over. And so then we have the Mumakil, so Lord of the Rings. I love the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, and so these designs are so good for their time. These movies came out in like 2001, 2002. Like, that's insane, and they just look so good. But they are exactly giant versions of this really cool early elephant called Stegotetrabelodon, and so it's got these long, lower tusks in addition to the ones on the top, which is exactly what the Mumakil looked like in Lord of the Rings when they went into war. And now Tolkien didn't describe them like this. He just called them pretty much big elephants, but Peter Jackson kind of took that extra liberty reaching into the fossil record for the inspiration of these creature designs. Maybe not Peter Jackson, but at least Lord of the Rings creature designers took really clear inspiration from this elephant, among others that had these scooping tusks. So no, we're talking about Avatar again. We're going to continue talking a little bit more about Avatar. So the Ikron in Avatar are among my favorite sci-fi design creatures, and they are very clearly based off of pterosaurs, which are these dinosaur relatives that flew, kind of the first large vertebrates with powered flight. And in this case, probably the pterosaurs which had the longer tails, things like Rhamphorhynchus here, because these Ikron, they have these long balancing tails. And another creature from the fossil record called Microraptor. And so what's cool about the Ikron is they have two double pairs of wings. They have forewings and hind wings, which there are no animals that actually fly around like that today. So it's interesting where they got the inspiration from. And they've never admitted this in any behind-the-scenes things, but Microraptor is the only animal that we know of that probably glided and flew with posterior wings as well. And so two prehistoric flying animals likely influenced the Ikron from James Cameron's Avatar. And then the Elu, this I was very excited about. This was featured in Avatar: The Way of Water, the second movie. This is a plesiosaur. So Caitlin mentioned that I study marine animals in particular. And seeing an alien plesiosaur was the coolest thing for me. I don't think I've ever seen plesiosaurs actually used for that much creature design scientific inspiration as other animals like dinosaurs and pterosaurs. But it's a plesiosaur. It's friendly and cute, but pretty much it's got the long neck and it swims with its limbs, which plesiosaurs are, iconic for doing, swimming with these 4 equal-sized flippers. And it was just so beautiful to see in the movie and how elegant they were. And there's no living precedent for this, right? Is there any long-necked, large marine tetrapod shaped like this today? Like, if we didn't have the fossil record, could someone come up with this organically? Maybe, but I think back to medieval times and the bestiaries that they made. They could only work with what they saw. And if we didn't know plesiosaurs existed from the fossil record, I can't imagine someone designing a long-necked plesiosaur seal-like thing. So that's kind of why I think this creature is so cool in particular. And so Pokémon. So everyone here at least is familiar with Pokémon. And it's kind of a basic tenet of liking Pokémon. Okay, Pokémon evolution, I'm going to evolve my Pokémon to the next level and the next level. But that's evolution, like, in this game since Pokemon came out like 1999. And it's silly evolution. It's not really grounded in anything. But it does have kind of these intermediate forms going from this smaller thing to a more scary, more robust thing. So evolution is a staple of Pokemon. Which is just a really cool thing. Again, because we know the field of evolution since 1859, thanks to Darwin, it has influenced an entire video game franchise. When you're playing this game or watching this show, like I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to evolve my Charmander. Like, that's what you're saying to yourself when you're playing the game. Like, oh, I want Charizard so bad, I have to evolve it. And so that's something that's so common in the zeitgeist of known Pokemon. I don't think people stop and think that this is like a really strong scientific concept baked into the existence of Pokemon. And even then, outside of just evolution, look how dinosaurian some Pokemon are. So it's like a little alligator Pokemon, one of my favorites, turning into essentially an alligator dinosaur as it goes through. Again, where does that inspiration come from? Obviously paleontology, obviously dinosaurs. And then things like Eevee. So for those who are not Pokemon enthusiasts here, Eevee is so super cool because Eevee can evolve into all of these different Pokemon in one direction. And so I look at this figure and I look at all these evolutions, as people call them, as looks a lot like Darwin's finches, where you have this ancestral form radiating into these kind of different niches. And so that's what Eevee's super cool too, is Eevee's really good for kind of showcasing evolution, because you have one Eevee that can turn into different things depending on its needs, what it's exposed to, fire, stone, ice, moon, sunlight, things like that. So clearly based in our understanding of evolution. And so then Monster Hunter is another franchise that I'm a really big fan of, and I think Monster Hunter has probably the best creature design of any franchise. They have so many creatures and so many monsters, if you will, but they're all handled with such incredible care and attention to scientific detail that I love it. So Monster Hunter Wilds is a very recent game, just came out. Anyone Monster Hunter Wilds? One hand, yes, cool, awesome. So great game. But look at the design of these creatures. Obviously dinosaurian, but they have incredible details, different ecological niches. Ecology is super important to the Monster Hunter franchise, but this is so obviously a dinosaur. This is so obviously some type of maybe predatory plesiosaur crocodile-like thing. Just really, really fantastic design. And I love the Monster Hunter franchise for exposing people to all these different varieties of creatures and diversity in the same ecosystem. This is the flagship monster for the entire franchise, something called a Rathalos, and it is a dragon, obviously, but it also has a lot of theropod-like features. A theropod is going to be your kind of two-legged, meat-eating dinosaurs, like a T-Rex, shaped like that, and Rathalos walks like that. It tucks its arms back, and it walks forward like a T-Rex. It's very terrifying and very, very cool, very well thought out and well-made creature, and no doubt with a paleontology influence. I cannot imagine making a creature with this quality without having the fossil record to look back on. This is another Monster Hunter creature called Tigrex, which literally is like tiger plus T-Rex, and the skull is literally a T-Rex skull. But it works. It works like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's familiar, I like this creature, and it's just really awesome. So Monster Hunter is great in that regard. Now, paleontology does not just influence designs, but narratives as well. So I put Jurassic Park here. Jurassic Park's entire narrative and entire plot is contingent on the existence of fossil animals. It's about the ethics, right, of de-extinction, the ethics of genetic power in the context of, bringing these animals back. Ian Malcolm says in the movie, like, just because, you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think if you should. And so is that a question that you would ask, for like bringing back condors, which they posit in the movie too? No, it's the idea of bringing back these extinct creatures. So you can have entire plot structures centered around paleontology itself and paleontology's existence. If we don't have the field of paleontology, or the field of paleontology was not as refined as it was by 1993 or earlier when Michael Crichton wrote the book, we would not have Jurassic Park. And paleontology is featured as a plotline for other movies too. So we have King Kong here, The Valley of Gwangi, which combines cowboys and dinosaurs, which is one of my favorite movies, it's so fun. The Land That Time Forgot, it's so cheesy, but these are really cool movies for me as a paleontologist. I've seen all of them because I'm interested in the history of my field and the history of my field as it relates to entertainment. And they're great. And again, they show how people thought of these animals, back in time, back in the past, like few, decades, last century, but as animals, as dynamic, living, breathing things. But the whole plot of these movies is the paleontology, is the creatures, is the dinosaurs terrorizing them and trying to escape Skull Island, trying to, corral the dinosaurs away and to not get eaten by a pterodactyl. So that's paleontology. But so another aspect that I kind of consider in tandem. So the title of the talk mentions only paleontology, but really geology is in there too, because geology, of course, has had incredible influence on fictional landscapes. And so Middle-earth from Lord of the Rings. So I love the Middle-earth map. It's really so beautiful to look at. I used to have like a poster of it put on my wall somewhere. I never threw it out. I don't know where it is now, actually. But so Lord of the Rings was written between 1937 and 1949, so it took Tolkien some time. It was published in 1954, and so we remember plate tectonics, not really accepted until the 1960s. So Tolkien came up with an alternate map. So he did not take, our modern Earth. He came up with a map. And so that's totally fine. It was very grounded, and it made sense, and it was still fantasy, and it was in a world where geology was becoming known. So people could make up, fantastical islands and new continents, whatever, and it didn't really affect storytelling. But with the advent of plate tectonics And knowing that the continental arrangements were different or could be different, I think that validates these fantasy maps so much more, in my opinion. Without plate tectonics, could we look at a fantasy map and be like, yeah, sure, I buy that. You have this cool island with this feature here and this feature here, maybe, sure. But I love that we know the Earth and continents have changed. So it's totally within scientific reason and scientific liberty to come up with your own map, your own continental arrangements. So this is Westeros from Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin very much based kind of Westeros, this is Essos. There's two continents, Essos and Westeros. And so George R.R. Martin very clearly based this Westeros on Europe, Essos kind of on, I believe, Asia for the most part. And there's actually another continent down here called Sotheros, for those who are not super Game of Thrones nerds like I am. But it's cool because it works. It's clearly inspired by our current continental arrangement. You have a more western continent and a more eastern continent, but they're different. And you can do this and it makes sense. No one in the world is going to look at a map and be like, well, that can't happen. The world doesn't change. The world can't be different. But it was, and it is. So I'm a big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, so this map is kind of burned into my brain. Again, a unique continental arrangement. And this planet in this world is called Earth. By the way, they call it Earth. This is the Earth Kingdom. And so again, you have these different continental arrangements that work because our Earth has done this. Earth has had different continental arrangements. So these, by the way, are all of Earth's supercontinents. Some of you might be like, all of Earth's supercontinents? There wasn't just one called Pangaea. Actually, Pangaea was the last supercontinent. Technically, today, you could argue Eurasia is actually a supercontinent today. By the way, Europe and Asia's place, there's a huge continent, so you could say that's supercontinent. But like, if we're talking supercontinent, Pangaea was the most recent one. You had Gondwana, Laurasia, Pannonia, Rodinia is a pretty famous one, Nuna, Kennerland, Ur, which I love, and then kind of these early, not supercontinents, but these early cratons, these early origins of continents, all throughout Earth history. So we have so many selections of continental arrangements to choose from for inspiration when it comes to these ancient maps, or these fantasy maps, rather. And so this is a really cool graphic. It's in French because they were the ones who made this one. I could not find one in English, so props to whatever French geology nerd made this really incredible figure, but it shows all the movements of the continents. And you might see, like when I see this arrangement, I see the Avatar: The Last Airbender kind of world map. I think aspects of Gondwana, Laurasia look a lot like George R.R. Martin's map. So pretty cool to see kind of how time has gone. So this is not even like the oldest. This is only from about 600 million years ago to today. So I'll let that run through one more time so you can see, because I love it. And it's so neat to think that our continents have done this. And they're still doing this. They're moving right now beneath our feet. And by the way, something I didn't point out is what made continental drift known was seafloor spreading discovered in the mid-Atlantic rift in the 1960s, where they saw that new magma was coming out and actually pushing the continents apart. They're like, oh my gosh, they're moving. And so I think it moved like 6 inches every year, depends on where you are. All I know is that in 6 million years, Los Angeles will be next to San Francisco, which is wild to think about. It's moving at that rate. So this is kind of a cool summary. But the neat thing is that it's not just about what the continents look like, but also the conditions on these continents. So supercontinents were super arid in the interior. Pangaea probably had just massive swaths of desert the size of over Africa in the middle of it. Just incredible aridity, super hostile to life on Earth. But so we have precedent for a planet like Tatooine in Star Wars, with its famous double moon, giant hostile desert planet, and Arrakis in Dune, again, another giant hostile desert planet. Earth was at one point a big desert planet with these giant continents in it where there was no storms, no moisture in the interior, and life was impossible to exist. So maybe you can watch Dune and Star Wars and not know that, but it's cool to find that out because it grounds it more. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool to know that sci-fi actually has this precedent. Mustafar, you're like, okay, well, this can't possibly be a real thing on Earth, like this giant fire planet, I mean, how cool would that be, Duel of Fates, on Earth. But there is actually precedent for a giant fiery planet. Early Earth definitely looked like this. When it was first forming, giant ball of molten lava, which is kind of nuts to think about, just floating there, on fire, cooling over time after all the energy of the solar system kind of settled down. But maybe less extreme, because you couldn't really put cities and other structures on this planet, this Earth, is something called the Deccan Traps. And the Deccan Traps are responsible for the end Permian mass extinction, which is the most devastating extinction of life on Earth ever. And so the Deccan Traps were the result of what's called a large igneous province. Picture this giant volcano raging across the entirety of Siberia for like 500,000 years. This, for 500,000 years. We have the layers. You can see these giant basalt cliffs in Siberia, indicating that the world, that part of the world, was literally on fire 250 million years ago, which is so cool. And like, we're so lucky there's no large igneous provinces today. There used to be, like super recently, the Owens Valley in California, not too far, was a large igneous province. I've seen the basalt layers. That place was on fire like a couple 100,000 years ago for a long time. Imagine that, a volcano flow for like over 100,000 years. So cool. So we can kind of see that now. So Mustafar can exist. And then lush worlds like Avatar and Pandora, obviously James Cameron takes very much inspiration from our modern rainforests, but there were also times of great greenhouse effects on planet Earth today in which really the whole world was covered in these dense, moist, humid rainforests. And so, yes, we have rainforests today, absolutely, but as far as I can tell, most of Pandora, the moon of Pandora, is covered in these tropical forests, at least to a degree. And so that has happened. There has been an Earth in real life where it was covered mostly in rainforests, and grasslands came later. What we think of today as a modern Earth, savannas and grasslands and deserts and rainforests all mixed in, kind of came within the last about 50 million years. After the dinosaurs went extinct, it was a lot of rainforests all over the planet. And so there's also the influence of time and story, so this is kind of the last section, with regards to plot in general. So now that we know time is so ancient and it's so deep, you can incorporate time and deep time into your stories. And so one of the two recent examples, I just happened to watch the movies, like, oh, that's good, I'll bring that up in my talk, is Transformers: Age of Extinction. At the beginning of this movie, they imply that Transformer metal is mined from organic life forms and that they killed the dinosaurs before humans, and they did that. So it's not realistic, it makes no sense, but it's cool to think that you have deep time in a Michael Bay Transformers movie as like part of the main plot. And then in Prometheus, even more extreme is this whole scene at the opening of the movie. This is like a dead, lifeless Earth, kind of like recently cooled after it was a ball of fire. This guy drinks this creepy space stuff, and he kind of disintegrates into organic form. And it's the concept that he seeded Earth for life. Again, silly concept biologically. I could go into a whole rant of why that makes no sense, but I won't. But it's a really cool thing to see in the movie feature this kind of deep time plot stuff. And so there's also the concept of consultation versus inspiration. So this is actually like the last kind of main section. So Jurassic World was consulted on by a colleague of mine, and Game of Thrones, as far as I could tell, I don't know anyone who actually consulted on it, but they have indicated that they were inspired. So, you know, what is what? Like, is one better than the other? I have a lot of friends who are dinosaur nerds who hate this movie because, like, well, why did he let that pass? Why did he let them do it? Like, he didn't let them do anything. They consulted him to ground their story, and then they made the story the way they wanted. They made the Giganotosaurus, this dinosaur, look the way they wanted. And they can do that. I study mosasaurs and marine reptiles. This is a bigger than a blue whale-sized mosasaur. It is absurd. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense to actual science, but I love it. Because at the end of the day, we'll wrap it back to the beginning, world building just matters for immersion, realism, and believability. And all you have to do is be immersed in the story in its context. It has to be real enough that you enjoy it and you don't immediately dismiss it, though some people still will, and that's okay. And it has to be just believable enough, like, okay, yeah, I could believe that they could resurrect dinosaurs from mosquito amber because they frame it that way in the movie, in its context. So I'm a big proponent of it's okay to bend science and storytelling. Despite me being a scientist, I'm not a stickler for this. I don't say like, oh, that's so unrealistic. I might think it, but I still very much enjoy my stories. And at the end of the day, these are stories, and science, like paleontology and like geology, just helps make them cooler, keeps it grounded. So anyway, thank you so much. I hope you appreciated these insights. Thank you for staying. Hey, cool. All right, I see Caitlin's up there with the mic for questions, so feel free to throw any questions at me.
Thank you so much, Kiersten.
Thank you.
We do a lot of work at this museum around science and art, and so this was really wonderful, actually, as a connection to the Ichthyosaur exhibition upstairs, but also as a kind of prelude to the conference tomorrow, so thank you. One of the things that I find a lot, I work with a lot of different kinds of scientists through the museum, and one of the things that we always struggle with is that when you talk about art and art with scientists, they get really excited oftentimes very quickly because they think they're going to get really great illustrations of their science and not something else like you've been discussing in these sort of the science-informed narrative and artwork. So I guess I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about getting scientists to understand the value and importance of the art being able to communicate their ideas in a different way?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. I would say stay tuned for my keynote talk tomorrow. But so to give spoilers, like a lot of scientists are just going to be like that. And that is something I always like to say. Like some scientists really do look at art as kind of a means to an end, a way to kind of express their science exactly the way they want it to, as kind of like this visual conveyance. I think people are definitely getting more comfortable with the idea of art using science to stand on its own and still drawing people back to the work that inspired it. Your Ichthyosaur exhibit is a great example of that. And so I think it really just depends on the scientist. I think younger, early career scientists are definitely more pro-art in that regard, where someone could be like, hey, I'm really inspired by your work. Can I do some art on it? And then, they show you and it's beautiful. Could be abstract, could be different, could be even a little anatomically incorrect if you're dealing with a creature, but it's beautiful and it still works. And at the end of the day, science is also a story, and stories have to be sold. You have to make a story interesting and engaging. Again, all plots for my keynote talk tomorrow. But I think science needs to accept that. Like it's not just like art. Like it's art and science. It's like, well, your science is a story too, and art can help enhance your story, actually. So embrace it. So hopefully that is a good response without being too much of a spoiler.
Kiersten, thank you for the talk. That was really good. And I'm actually a high school English teacher here for the conference.
Sweet.
And I know that I have a lot of students that would really enjoy, even if they probably know it on their own too, to be honest, more than me. But the links between true science and what's in their art and book. Do you have a book or books that you would recommend as something as a good jumping off point for, like a link?
That is such a good question. I know books that exist. I don't have an answer, but I'm genuinely down to swap information. Give me some time to find out. I'll ask my Paleosphere, my Twitter sphere, for recommendations. I know there are definitely some. Man, I feel so bad. Yeah, I'm so sorry, but I will get you an answer if you like.
No,
or at
yeah.
least by tomorrow, if you're going to stop by my keynote, I'll have an
Absolutely.
answer for you then, I promise.
And we get into the other media too. I mean, I talk film with them all the time as well too.
Cool.
So that's it. And I guess anime would be the other one that they would want to know about.
Yes, anime is definitely a big one,
All
for
right.
sure. But
Thank you.
You'll appreciate my keynote tomorrow. I'm actually happy to know that there are going to be English teachers here, hopefully art, music teachers. It's going to be something fun for everyone.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, of course.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, if you could all help me in thanking Kiersten Formoso.
Thank you. Great. Feel free to come up and ask me any question also. I'm so happy.